Gareth stood under an awning watching the crowded street. Each narrow sidewalk and every shop seemed to have people moving all about, careless of the bad weather. It rang as odd to him that no one attempted to share the space under the awning, let alone even look his direction. In lighter weather, Gareth might have steeled himself and re-entered the fray. He had a lot of shopping left to do after all, but right when he stuck his foot out, ready to walk, a fresh downpour followed a terrifying peal of thunder. Without another thought, Gareth turned and pushed through the tiny door, for no other reason than to hide from the miserable day. Maria could wait an hour more for groceries. "Hello, sir," a voice said from somewhere behind him. Gareth turned away from the storm and looked into the shop, surprised by the appearance. The whole place was incredibly narrow, and when he thought of it, he was amazed that it managed to fit between Finnegan's Family Restaurant and Benny's Butchery in the first place. In fact, Gareth had never noticed the shop before. Once he got past the initial feeling of being cramped, he realized he couldn't quite tell what the store sold, or for that matter, who had spoken. 2 shelves ran the length of it, and as Gareth walked between them, he saw they were filled with nothing but certificates and trophies. They represented all kinds of achievements, from swimming tournaments to chess championships, and strangely enough, marriage and birth certificates. Forgeries, Gareth whispered to himself. "What was that, sir?" By then he was far enough into the shop to see a small desk at the far end of the room, and a little man sitting behind it. The man was one of those odd people, full of contradictions, young but with a face full of wrinkles. He appeared stick-like, but sat with a straight back and held a steady gaze. Gareth, who was over 6 feet tall, already felt smaller than the man. As he approached the desk, he stuck his hands deep into his coat pockets. "Hello." "Hello," the man replied. "I notice you're looking at my achievements." Gareth raised his eyebrows. "You're—" He looked around and back to the man. "Oh, yes, I see. I really only came in for shelter, you know. Although I don't think that it was legal to have a shop like this right out in the open. It's a very reputable street." The man laughed and stood. They shook hands. His skin was dry and hot to Gareth's touch. "My name is Daniel Sanvils, and while those are indeed my achievements, they are also not forgeries," he winked. "However, they do not necessarily belong to me." "I see. They are yours, but they don't belong to you." Gareth was beginning to wonder whether the man was all there. Was the rain coming down outside? He turned to check, but was drawn back to the man speaking. "I think I can help you with your problems, Mr. Cameron," Gareth said. "Gareth Cameron. Which problems exactly?" The man shrugged, laughed, and waved his hand across the many objects in front of him. "Here, pick an achievement. Any of them." Gareth stared at the different items. After a moment, he had a half-smile creep across his face. He grew worried, but the fellow didn't seem much of a threat. Suddenly, a watch stole Gareth's attention. He found himself leaning in, fast. Everything else might be a forgery, but that certainly isn't, he thought. "All right, then," Gareth said. "What's your deal? What is it you sell?" It was very curious how he made his living. Daniel Sanvils beamed as though he'd been paid a generous compliment. "Well, Mr. Cameron, I'll do what anyone with a good product does. I'll show instead of tell. If you like what you see, you can choose to buy or walk away. Although," he added, leaning over the desk, "between you and me, you'll buy. I'd bet on it." "I see," Gareth said. As far as he could tell, it was a forgery business, and in that case it was madness to associate with fake goods. Imagine a lawyer, of all people, being caught in such a place. But there was no one around, and he was curious. He nodded. Excellent, Daniel said. He turned and opened a rickety door to his right and entered without so much as a glance to see if Gareth followed. Gareth looked over his shoulder, but the people outside continued to walk right by the shop without a single cursory glance. He had a feeling the place didn't get much business despite the big shelves of achievements. He followed the man through the door. The room held nothing in the way of furniture except a wooden desk in the middle with a chair on either side. The wall opposite was hidden behind a brown curtain, and the wall to the right held more shelves of certificates and trophies. Those are my more prized possessions, Daniel said, making his way around the desk. Daniel opened the top drawer, took out a single die and a silver coin. He laid them down in front of Gareth, grinning. I'm not quite sure I see, said Gareth. Then I'll put it as simply as I can, Daniel said. You give me something, and I give something to you. We can start by flipping the coin, or if you're suspicious, you can use one from your pocket. Gareth reached into his pocket and drew a coin. This? Yes, whatever. Now, that's a normal coin, so if you flip it 10 times, roughly 5 will come out heads and 5 tails, correct? Yes, I'd say so. Now, I'm telling you, if you give me something, I can make it land tails every time, or heads, if you prefer. And it only needs to be a small something, since I'm only giving you a small something in return. Understand? I think so, Gareth said hesitantly. What exactly do you want from me to do this magic trick? A fingernail. A fingernail? Anyone will do, your pinky even. I don't see how that will. No, I'm sure you don't, Mr. Cameron, but that wasn't the agreement, was it? Well, Gareth thought, it's only a fingernail after all. Okay, it's a deal, he said at last. Daniel drew a pair of nail scissors from the same drawer. Allow me. Gareth put his hand forward warily, and Daniel snipped a fingernail with practiced ease. He caught the tiny crescent in midair and then dropped the clippers back into his desk. Go on then, Mr. Cameron. 10 times, all tails. Gareth raised his eyebrows and flipped the coin once, twice, 3 times. All tails. He checked beneath the desk for some kind of magnet and found nothing but rotted wood. Gareth flipped his coin again, 4, 5, 6, 7 more times. He flipped it differently each time, but it always came up tails. He checked to see if Daniel had somehow exchanged it for a 2-sided coin and was disappointed. On the 11th flip, it came up heads. Impossible. All thoughts of getting groceries and returning home to his wife were gone. Daniel laughed. What about the dice? Gareth inquired. Ah, well, that will require the rest of your fingernails, I think. Say, to land 6 10 times in a row. Gareth could barely believe his ears, but out came the scissors and away went his nails. 10 times the die landed on 6. By the time the final die settled, Gareth felt like a man in a dream. It was, of course, a brilliant magic trick. It's a trick then, isn't it? Daniel sighed. We can go on all day, Mr. Cameron. You can bring me dice or coins of your own, but then we do it with your toenails. You can have the room analyzed for devices if you like, or the easiest way, we could bring up the stakes to the point where faking is impossible. Like what? Well, you tell me. You name me something you want, and I will make it happen, if you pay the price. And what exactly is the price based on? Gain. The more that is gained, the more that is lost. Ah. Gareth looked around the dusty room for ideas and found none. Then at last it came to him. My groceries, he said. Make them appear right here, everything on the list. As he spoke, his hand delved into his pocket, found the list, and scrunched it up as though he were afraid Daniel might read it through his coat. Daniel simply nodded, and his eyes rolled up for a minute. as if calculating a few minor equations. Yes, a good choice. Impossible to fake, but without too much gain. I think I will need the tip of any extremity. Your choice. And only the very tip, you understand. Almost nothing at all. Gareth put his hand on the table. This would be the final experiment, and if it didn't work, well, he thought the tip of a finger would be worth it for the show he'd been given, bizarre as it was. Daniel whipped a scalpel from his coat pocket and took hold of Gareth's pinky. Gareth forced himself to watch, resisting the urge to pull away. Daniel whipped the scalpel through the end of his finger with frightening speed. Gareth pulled back his hand and clutched it, waiting for the instant of pain to pass. A shiny oval of blood sat where his fingerprint used to be. Well, I suppose that wasn't so bad. Daniel gestured behind Gareth. For a moment, Gareth didn't want to turn around. He was certain there was nothing there. He'd been tricked by a sadistic madman, and who's to say Daniel wouldn't attack him as soon as he turned his head? But he turned, and the groceries were there, in a neat pile of plastic bags just by the door. Breathless, he pulled his shopping list from his coat pocket and touched every item while Daniel chuckled. When Gareth was done, he shook so badly he fell back into the seat. He didn't dare take his eyes from the bags, as though they might disappear at any moment. "Are you satisfied, Mr. Cameron?" Daniel said with only the slightest hint of impatience present in his voice. Now Gareth understood the shelves in the front of the shop. They were achievements bought from this man. He must have copied them as a way to advertise. Or perhaps, he thought, so a customer could walk the shelves, choose an achievement, and buy it using a piece of himself. Gareth's mind reeled with the possibilities. The potential of what he could accomplish became overwhelming. That's it, he thought. I have it. My whole life, everything I've ever wanted, it can all be mine. In a strange ecstasy, Gareth took off his left shoe and sock, leaned back in the chair, and slammed his foot on the table. "What can I get for these?" he asked, wiggling his toes. Daniel threw his head back and clapped his hands, laughing with seemingly genuine amusement. "Now we're talking my language, sir." He stood up and walked over to the brown curtain. In one easy motion, Daniel swept the curtain aside. Gareth saw a surgeon's armory hanging, from pliers to cleavers, razors to bone saws, everything one would need to dismantle a human body into 1,000 pieces. For a second, Garth felt terrified, but then he remembered that this was a business deal. The man had honored everything thus far, and while he wanted his payment, what it was bizarre, and no one could say he hadn't delivered. Daniel took something from the wall that looked like a brand new pair of hedge clippers. He set the clippers on the table and folded his hands in front of him, smiling widely. "Yes," Daniel said. "There is plenty you could get with the toes on this foot, and plenty more with the whole foot. But it is better, I think, if you name your want and then I name my price." Gareth noticed how clean and new the tools seemed, gleaming in the room's dim light. "Ah, all right then," Gareth said, his mind spinning with ideas. It should be something decent, he thought, something worth toes. "You must keep in mind, Mr. Cameron, that I have been quite lenient with my prices so far. Not too much, but do not think you can make your life perfect with a hand or a foot." Yes, of course," Gareth nodded. It was sensible, after all. Didn't all salesmen do that? A test drive before you paid for the real thing? "I would like to win the lottery," he said, slowly, knowing he was pushing his luck. "The biggest one in the world, the biggest jackpot, whatever it is." Daniel grinned and nodded thoughtfully. "This I can do, if I take all of your toes." Gareth stared. His heart beat so hard he could feel a vein throbbing near his big toe. "All of them?" he asked. "Yes." but the largest lottery in the world that is in America, full of taxes. You would do better to take the English lottery. It will be easier to claim your prize, and the money you get is still 160 million pounds tax-free. That's 16 million pounds per toe. Daniel watched him patiently. The silence dragged on. Gareth turned and looked from the piles of shopping bags back to the man. "I'll do it," he said, almost whispering. No sooner had he said the words did 3 of his toes disappear, and the pain struck him like an iron club. He fell from his chair, but Daniel kept one impossibly strong hand on his ankle as he worked his way down his foot. The blades cut through the last 2 toes an instant before the clippers snipped shut. A terrible popping noise accompanied the departure of each, followed by the soft clicks of them landing on the wooden floor. Gareth squeezed his eyes shut and let out a scream that must have rattled the front windows. In his agony, he forgot that he'd promised Daniel another 5 toes. Daniel didn't bother to take off Gareth's right shoe, but instead he walked around the table and cut right through it, severing all 5 toes in a straight line and taking a good part of his foot as well. All of it fell onto the floor, a chunk of flesh and blood mingled with leather and fabric. For a long time Daniel did nothing but roll on the floor and scream. He blacked out once, and when he came to, he threw up. As the pain became more manageable, he opened his eyes and focused on Daniel standing over him, chuckling. His face shined from a thin sheen of sweat. "Ah, now that was something, Mr. Cameron. You won't regret it, I promise you." With that pledge, he took out a long rectangle of paper and pressed it into Garrett's hand, his shaking hand. "A lottery ticket. You now hold the winning numbers for next week's jackpot, sir. Congratulations." "Aye, good God. Let me out of here. Let me out." Gareth clutched his ticket and crawled towards the doorway. "Don't forget your groceries," Daniel called after him. Gareth wiped his mouth and attempted to stand. The absence of toes made it difficult to keep his balance. He noticed the trail of blood behind him, but the flow seemed to slow down surprisingly fast. He managed to drag his groceries all the way out the front door, but received no help from the sly and sharply dressed salesman. When Gareth glanced over his shoulder, Daniel was nowhere to be found. Gareth won the lottery the following Monday night, which was a good thing because the first thing he'd done after we returned with the groceries was leave his wife. He wanted to do it for years, and oh, was it sweet seeing her sour face turn to gaping surprise. That moment was enough to pay him back for every evil word and threat she had ever heaped upon him. For nearly 2 weeks, Gareth laughed about his good fortune. Using crutches to help him hobble on his toeless feet, the pain hardly bothered him at all. And people stared at him, yes, but he knew it wasn't the disability, it was the money. Already he'd received phone calls from people he'd never met claiming to be long-lost relatives. He quit his job, telling all his co-workers what he thought of them. He purchased a mansion on the edge of town. His new wardrobe consisted of nothing but $10,000 suits. His new car cost more than what most people pay for their homes. He purchased everything he ever wanted and lived the life he had always dreamed. But Gareth still was not happy. All he could think about was the weedy little man in the shop and what he still had to offer. Eventually, desire got the better of him, and he decided to go back to see Daniel Samville's. "Oh, Mr. Cameron," Daniel said, welcoming him with open arms. "I was afraid you'd never return. You left so unhappily last time, you see, and I was a little afraid that I'd maybe given you too much." "I've been thinking about you a lot, actually," Gareth said, shaking Daniel's hand. "Is that so?" Daniel asked. "Well, why don't you sit and we can talk about it?" It wasn't long before they struck a new deal. Gareth gave a kidney for an IQ of 200, his entire right arm for an extra life, and his left eye and ear for the ability to understand, speak, and write every language. Next, he gave his teeth for the ability to charm any woman he wanted. That one was particularly painful. The worst part of the entire process was the enjoyment Daniel seemed to have while working with pliers. He shrieked with laughter all the while, dancing around a half-conscious Gareth. He spent most of his left leg on eternal wealth and gave his right for the ability to fly. Who needs legs when you could fly anyway? That one, Daniel told him, would take 3 days to take effect, just like the language skills and irresistible charm. They were all powerful abilities, he explained, so it would take some time. At last, Gareth had enough. Daniel propped him up in the far corner of the room, his right side, what was left of it, pressed up against the window. Blood pooled everywhere, but still he felt fine. That, Daniel assured him, was part of the deal. You felt the pain, but the damage quickly healed. Dead customers are not likely to come back after all, Daniel smiled. Gareth suffered plenty of pain, and with each throb of agony, he knew he made the right choice. Nothing in the world could stop him. His life was made. In a matter of weeks, he would become the most powerful man alive, the richest, and the most charismatic. He watched Daniel wipe the bloody tools clean and placed them back behind the brown curtain, humming as he went. When he finished, he walked over to Gareth and shook his left hand heartily. "Well, Mr. Cameron," he said, "it's been excellent doing business with you. 3 days from now, the more extreme of your requests will be granted, but the others you possess as of this very second." Gareth grinned back at Daniel, fresh blood streaming down his chin. "Thank you, Mr. Sanville. Can't wait." What Daniel didn't know was that Gareth was going to have most of what he'd lost replaced with expensive modern devices. And then what had he really lost? Even arms and legs could be replaced with machines. Yes, it will be brilliant," Daniel agreed. "Just be patient. Here, you can rest in my shop until the effects come into play. Just sleep a while, and when you wake, the world will be yours." Gareth smiled gratefully, muttered another thank you, then fell fast asleep. He dreamed he traveled the earth, rich and famous. He experienced every delicacy, every adventure that the world had to offer. He dreamed of becoming a president, of stopping wars, and of becoming a legend. When he woke, he saw a long rectangle of gray sky above him. He sat up with much difficulty, using his stump to push himself against the wall. On either side were 2 moldy walls, an alleyway. Gareth frowned. It was all very well if Mr. Samvilles hadn't wanted him lying in his shop, but had he really had to dump him like trash? He crawled like a lopsided tortoise to the end of the alleyway, disgusted by his surroundings. Mold and garbage, he thought as he pushed along. All he needed was to flag down a taxi and get back to his mansion. Lucky, all of the bleeding had stopped, and his wounds proved to be healed. But when he reached the pavement, he realized that no taxi would pick him up in his current state. Everyone who saw him crossed the road or completely turned around and walked the other way. Gareth tried asking a man for help, but his lack of teeth rendered the words incomprehensible. The other man stared ahead and walked past, but not before dropping a few coins at his feet. Fool, Gareth thought. I'm infinitely rich, not a damn beggar. When he turned back to the alleyway, his heart nearly stopped. Benny's Butchery sat on one side, and Finnegan's Family Restaurant on the other. He was right where Mr. Samuels had left him, only the shop had vanished. Gareth wondered how long he'd been asleep. Obviously less than 3 days, since he couldn't fly yet. He still had infinite wealth, a second life, and an IQ of 200. He just needed to get back to his mansion. But no one would help him. For 3 days he kept to the alleyway, begging and snatching the discard from Benny's and Finnegan's dumpsters, and wanting for his powers to arrive. His mind traveled to the things he would do when he received what he had paid for. The first step would be having a shower, then a good meal. Then he'd charm a woman or two. The thought made him laugh. The third day came to an end. So did the fourth, and then the fifth. The truth settled in and he began to beg in earnest. Gareth remained in the alley, waiting for Daniel Sanville to come back and give him what he was owed. If you paid him enough coin and had a good ear for his toothless speech, you might hear a decent story in return. It's not a likely story, maybe, but it's a good one, and it even has a moral. Quit while you're ahead, Gareth would say. A few fingers or O's, and then Eve forever. If you can do that, the world can be yours. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this story in its entirety. If you've enjoyed what you've heard and would like to support me and my efforts, hit the like button and do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications today. And please share this video with everyone on your social media. With just a few clicks, you can help this channel grow and reach new listeners. You can also support me by subscribing to my podcast, Scary Stories Told in the Dark, with dozens of episodes available now. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com for more details today. For exclusive, ad-free extended episodes of my program, including stories you won't find here on YouTube, visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com/join and sign up as a patron today or pick up a season pass for my show. Lastly, if you'd like to contribute directly, you can support me with donations at patreon.com. Just visit patreon.com/Otis Jiry. That's patreon.com/OTISJIRY. Thanks again for listening and for your support. Have a great day, and God bless you.